and welcome to one of my demented little missions in life. So, fairly infamously, one of the very first archive episodes back in 2012 was about the home video format wars of the 70s through 90s. And during the Laserdisc versus CED segment, I admittedly rather mindlessly referenced the ongoing legend regarding the US, specifically Laserdisc issue of the 1996 Arnold Schwarzenegger film Eraser. And of course, Eraser is supposed to be the all-time most rot-heavy and by turn lowest surviving Laserdisc. And indeed, it has been sitting comfortably atop the Laserdisc database's top 100 rotters list for over a decade now. Now, having said that, if the LDDB Laserdisc database stats are anything to go by, over half of the copies of this movie are supposed to be still at least somewhat playable. So we're not talking automatic failures here or anything. But anyway, getting on to my own story, I guess it was about a year or so ago now, I happened onto a copy of this movie on Fleabay, and it was going for 99 cents, plus shipping, of course, and tax. And knowing the legend, and having never owned a copy of this, I figured for a lark I would just pick it up. The price was right. But then my brain went into overdrive. If I wanted to even attempt to accurately gauge the survival rate of this title, I would need more than one copy, and ideally at least one still sealed copy in there for a control test, I guess you could say. So since then, as they've come up cheap on Fleabay, I've picked up an additional 5 copies, so 6 total. Now, one of those got destroyed in transit, so that brings us down to 5. And I can only vouch for 4 copies of this. Now, I haven't played any of these, but I do have 4 physically intact copies of this. I'm just taking it on faith that the still sealed one is not broken. Now, as I mentioned, I picked these up really cheap. I spent way more on the shipping than anything else. Only the sealed copy cost me much of anything. I think that was $6 plus shipping and tax. So anyway, there is one pretty easy requirement for this to work. It doesn't just have to be the US issue of this, but it had to have been manufactured here in the US by Sony DADC. And as far as I know, all American copies of this movie on this format were made by Sony DADC. So I'm not big on assumptions, but I think I'm pretty safe here. The markings on the 5 open copies are correct for Sony. So anyway, let me take a cut here and we'll get this party started. Well, this is going to take a little jockeying around on my part, but we'll make it work. I always figure out a way to pull it off somehow. So I want to do 2 rounds of testing here. I want to do one on my sacrificial Laserdisc player, a Pioneer CLD S304, not that I'm terribly worried about destroying it, and then a round on my good everyday machine, a CLD D605, also Pioneer. And both of my machines have 2 sets of outputs, so I've taken the opportunity to not just run to the TV, but also to take some direct feed footage. And I'm not sure how that's going to play out in the final video, but at least I'll have it all. So anyway, I've only got one shot at this. I want to start with the sealed copy. I want to start with a control test. And I'm going to have to put the microphone down because I'm on a leash and I don't think I have enough to make it over there. So bear with me here. So I'm just taking it on faith that this thing is not broken. And it looks intact. So let's get this going. Let me start the feed here, and actually let me plug in the computer. And we'll start at the logical beginning, side 1. So far, so good. It exists. And it looks clean. I assume there's going to be the Warner logo on this or some variant. Yeah. I mean, it's a little noisy, but it's really nothing bad at all. Let me jump through the chapters here. Actually, it looks really nice, all things considered. I didn't check to see how many chapters are on this. Everything's good. We're only 35 minutes into the movie. I'm assuming it's an hour-long side. It is CLV, so Lord knows how many chapters there are. Maybe 25 or so? Somewhere between 20 and 25. 20. 21. 22. I'm assuming that's it. Yep. All right. Well, I'm not going to subject you to a full test of everything in real time, so I'll do the B-side just for a lark on camera here, and then everything else will be direct feed footage, and then I'll pick up with you again verbally, with the microphone, of course, on the second round of tests. All right, looks good for the most part.
The House Armed Services Committee has announced that 2 weeks House Armed Services Committee has announced that 2 weeks from today, it will begin official...
They've been expecting you.
Well, I hadn't really set out to do any myth-busting with this episode. Call me an old cynic, but I was actually kind of hoping for some more extreme rot, just to see it in action, really firsthand. But there's nothing in my stack of copies of Eraser that stacks up to, say, my copy of Woody Allen's Annie Hall, an early issue of that one. Or worse yet, I've got one of the Spike Jonze and his City Slickers discs from the 80s from Paramount, and that thing is totally trashed. The audio is just garbage on that thing. So I'm not going to do another full battery of tests here. I just see no point in it. Only discs 4 and 5 seem to have any appreciable rot to them as far as I'm concerned, and I think 4 may have just as much to do with a certain amount of abuse at the hands of the original owner. But nonetheless, I do have my 605 on and hooked up. It always lives on the rack here. And I'll take a little footage just to see how it stacks up, see if it handles it any better or worse than the 304, but I'm not expecting any different results. So otherwise, I guess I'm going to go ahead and call it a day on the vocal front here. And yeah, we'll wrap this up, and I will talk to you again soon.
Some secluded